Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you're here for Talking Stick, we hope you are because we are. Please come on over tonight. Tonight, we are in the middle of our 9th year at the Rubin Museum. This is Talking Stick. We tell 2 stories from our lives on the gallery floors. Things, music, art, poetry inspired by the art. We're going to begin on the 6th floor. If you're going to follow me, let's... Thank you, Rubin, for all this lovely time. Tonight we have Mike Campbell. We have Master Lee. We have myself. We have Evan. And we have Jay Ruttenberg. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go upstairs to the 6th floor.
You can also leave them at the front desk if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought for the card. Yeah, Dodge.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a card. Pants.
We don't see that. We don't see those.
Yeah. Life goes on. Ladies and gentlemen, Evan Goodman from the Rubin Museum.
All right.
Mike Chair.
Cool. So, if anyone has not been to Talking Stick before, my name's Evan. I work here as a guide, and normally it's my job to introduce the piece and tell you a little something about it. The funny thing is that here we are in the mask show. These are all masks from all different cultures, and we have this mask here that's the piece for tonight. And the funny thing about it is that if you could read the plaque, it's over here. Don't worry, you're not missing anything, because it just says possible shamanic mask. It's from Nepal, and by possible shamanic mask, they mean that they found a mask. And it could be a shaman mask, or it could not be. And I think that's really funny because for me, that's really indicative of shamanism in general. There's lots of things in this exhibition that butt up against shamanism. In case anyone doesn't know what shamanism is, normally there's someone in a culture whose job it is to talk to, the world of the dead, or the spirit world, or whatever's going on behind the physical scenes. It's someone's job to reach through and see what's going on there. They're often a healer and things like that, and we call those people shaman generally. It's funny because I've been giving tours of this exhibition for so long, and people get really excited when you talk about shamanism, and it has this big, exotic flavor, and they get really excited about it, and afterwards people ask me all these questions, and it's funny for me because ultimately I realize that people think that shamanism and things like that only really go on in non-Western societies. We think of shamans, maybe we think of something that looks a little bit like this case over here. Someone in Mongolia, in like a yurt, sending up smoke to some gods or things like that, or someone in the Amazon. It's really funny for me because I know, actually, and I love telling other people this, that Western culture does have shamans. Except we don't call them shamans, we call them witches and wizards and things like that. And far from being the world of Harry Potter, those people actually existed and were basically the shamans of the West. In fact, perfect for Talking Stick, lots of these Western shamans, these wizards basically, who were real people, were often storytellers. If anyone knows Merlin, Merlin's a pretty popular character. Merlin was based on a real person who was actually basically a wizard. He was basically a bard, actually, and his name was Merdin. They only changed his name so that Merdin would not have the cognate sound with mierda, which means shit in Latin, so they changed it to Merlin. But he was a real person, he was a storyteller, and most of these magical characters were actually storytellers, so perfect for Talking Stick, where we do storytelling and things like that. What I want to tell you guys here about this mask is often when you dig into these shamanic and magical practices, you find things that, hint at these big transcultural connections that are totally inexplicable to modern scholars. So for example, there's a really awesome book, it's called Shamanism and Tantra in the Himalayas. It focuses on Nepal, where this mask is from, and I'd like to leave you with sort of a funny little fact in absence of some actual content about this mask, which probably no one in New York City actually knows anything about. It's a total mystery what this would be used for and what its purpose was and things like that. So it happens to be the case that in Nepal, they have a god. His name is Indra. He's an Indian deity. He's basically like a sky god who flies around on a cloud and throws a thunderbolt and gets up to crazy escapades and things like that. If you're a student of mythology, that might remind you of Zeus. Zeus is also a sky god who flies around and throws a lightning bolt and has crazy escapades. Same deal with Jupiter. So what's my point? It is that if you go to Nepal, where they still practice shamanism today, they might make you a brew, sort of like a beer, except unlike a beer, it's not made with hops, it's made with something called henbane seeds. And henbane seeds are actually a psychoactive plant. If you ate a bunch of them, you would have a really, really, really weird, interesting time, so don't do it without proper supervision. But in Nepal, they make a drink out of it, and they drink this brew and go on sort of a shamanic, visionary kind of quest, and they call this brew Indra's brew. So it's sort of funny because you can go all the way from Nepal up to Germany, where they brew a beer called a Pilsner. Most people have probably had a Pilsner. I'm looking forward to one when I leave work today, actually. But what most people don't know is that Pilsners used to not be brewed with hops. If you think about it, hops is a sedative, so if you're an ancient pagan person trying to like party down, why would you make a brew out of a sedative? You get tired, it really makes no sense. So Pilsners actually used to be brewed with the same thing, with those henbane seeds. So ancient German people, Celtic people also, used to make this brew out of henbane seeds, and they would drink it and go on sort of their own vision quest, but Western style. So what's my point? It is that, so you go to Nepal, they're making this brew, they call it Indra's brew. You go all the way to Germany, what did they call the henbane seed? They called it Jupiter's bean. So all the way from Germany to Nepal, you have the same brew, made out of the same substance, a henbane seed, named after the same god. And just like this mask, I have no logical explanation for that, so that's for you guys to figure out. Thanks.
Thank you, Evan.
Now, Evan, everybody take a big, deep breath. Evan didn't miss a syllable. That was like radio advertisement professional.
That's what I do, I guess.
No, it was great. Ladies and gentlemen, the founder of Talking Stick with myself, Master Lee.
flew in a plane for about 10 hours, and I landed in Greece. I've always wanted to go to Greece. Those motherfuckers, we still read them. That's a long fucking time ago. They've mythologies. Some people say they had the first form of democracy, which is bullshit. But I land in Athens. Open my eyes, I'm like, oh shit. This is like the East Village in the 70s. Maybe you heard about the economic crisis in Greece. I was like, shit, it's a cheap vacation. We might have hit bottom. And it's a little bit like DC. These monuments and then fucking slum and shit. Like, whoa. It's the first time the double antenna went up, you know. Usually there's one always going, but that was like, I gotta watch my back and my front. And then I flew from there to Istanbul. Whoa. So I'm 51. Why fuck around? Just do what you want to do. I And I go to Istanbul. One of the most beautiful buildings in the world is in Istanbul. They built this church, this dome so well, so big, it took them 1,000 years to build something bigger. So that's how you gauge art, by quantity. And it's one of the few things I've ever seen that's better than the postcard. The Grand Canyon. Yeah, that's better than the postcard. The Hagia Sophia, the wisdom in a feminine form. You go there and it's like this giant dome. And it feels like it's floating. And the Turkish people, they have a delight, a childish delight in them. I mean, besides killing the Armenians and the other genocide, but you know, they had a delight in them. I learned how to say, it's too expensive. Because I'm Chinese. Bucho pahala. And I'd bargain for everything. How much? 7 for the water. No. Bupo chapa. 6. That's a fixed price. But it made them laugh, you know. And then I want to go back to Greece. Now it's 102 fucking degrees. Imagine it's 102 degrees and you're in fucking some burnt out shit, right? There's no police presence. It's unbelievable. I saw one guy get pulled over the whole time. It's like, why did that guy get pulled over? Parliament building. And I'm trying to have an ecstatic experience. I'm trying to step out of my body. And the only thing they have there is hash. And you don't know how on guard you are when you're in Athens, in Istanbul, when you're smoking hash in a Muslim country. You don't really want to get caught. I mean, in general, you don't want to get caught, but in a fucking Muslim country where drinking is kind of like that, right? Where 5 times a day, I'm paraphrasing, of course. You're trying to relax. As a New Yorker, you don't realize your fucking neurotic brain is going on all the time, right? So you got to make your rent. Shit. Unless you're very clever. Chattering mind. And just to sink down into a slower place. Just to breathe. How the people breathe. And I'm matching the pace of the city. A Turkish guy lent me 15 Turkish. That's great. And then you realize things about, it's not the ruin, it's not the mystery inside what's on the 4th side of the Delphic Temple. It's nature. Sinking down into that slower pace. And then you go into the slower pace. Slower pace. So you can feel things. Be alive. Get out of that box. That matrix. Charles Mansfield, Jazz Palace. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
This is fun doing this in a museum, eh? So, our next performer is a musician, a composer, a writer, an actor, but mostly a really wonderful person. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Campbell. Thank you, Mike.
Well, it's nice to be here once again. Been collaborating with Talking Stick off and on over the years, and it's a wonderful part of New York City. After Master Lee, I think he's put us in a good place where I would like to guide everyone on a short meditation. So if you would please, I ask everyone to just close your eyes and listen along with me for a moment. Imagine yourself sitting at the ocean's edge. Ahead there is only water. Behind you there is only sand. You are alone. My voice is only a specter in the air. The water beyond you is still. The sand behind you is smooth. The sky above is without a cloud, but centered overhead is the sunlight of life. A light so powerful and bright, it becomes overwhelming. Its presence becomes blinding. Even its reflection in the sand and water is burning. Even as you shut your eyelids and cover them with your arms, it is too bright. The sun's light of life is too hot against your body, and there is no comfort in the sand and no comfort in the water, for they are radiating in the same unrelenting heat. You do not think you can manage to remain in the light any longer. It's just too powerful. But before you abandon hope, a change begins to occur, and the blinding light begins to set beyond the horizon. Slowly, moment by moment, you are relieved from the intensity. Fading at the distant water's edge, the sun leaves you in perfect darkness. The suffering and discomfort you were losing yourself in has left you now in complete stillness, without sight, without motion. The perfect stillness is with you until slowly a tiny, distant point of pure white develops beyond the atmosphere above you. And for a moment, it is the sole visible thing in the endless sea of dark. Gradually, so slowly, as your eyes adjust, another star appears above you, then another, and another. As the deep canvas around you develops, you find yourself surrounded by billions or trillions of dancing distant stars. They are the souls of all the life around you. They shimmer around you and you begin to smile. In the blinking infinite sea, you begin to laugh. Your heart is open to all of the stars with which you share the world. And in this moment of joy, your eyes have adjusted so deeply, you see now that you yourself are glowing in harmony with the vast expanse. You yourself are a point of light painted into the arms of life. And then it happens. The heavy sun begins again to rise. But to your own surprise, you are not fearful. Its heat warms your body pleasantly, and the light reflects within you now. Because through the deep darkness, you have attained inner light, and you have become aware that you are an important part of the power that surrounds you. Through darkness and light, you are strong, open, and attuned to the nature of reality's bounty of variables. Open your eyes. Let us all shine in great peace amongst one another.
Thank you, Michael. Our next performer is a writer. And I'm very happy to have this writer because not very many writers do talking stick. Precisely because they don't understand the difference between written word and spoken word. Written word is written beautifully in paragraphs and sentences to be heard in your head, you and the author at your own time, but spoken word is a moment of phrases that you hear that are punctuated in a poetic kind of way. Sometimes there's a melding of the two, but writers have a hard time standing up and talking. So when one comes and says, I want to do your story thing, and it says, I see the difference, I see the string of phrases. It's like, yes! Look at a lot of musicians, a lot of poets, a lot of artists. So ladies and gentlemen, our friend Jay Ruttenberg.
So whenever I see masks like these beautiful, sometimes ferocious masks around us, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s in America, and I think to the American equivalent for people my age, when I look at this, I always think of Mr. T. And I feel like that's like a very American thing. This pop culture, in some ways, is more holy to me than any religion. And it so happens that when I was young, I saw Mr. T. He had moved into a suburb near mine in Chicago. It was this very wealthy, conservative suburb, 20 minutes or so from where I lived. And he was very out of place there. And soon after he moved in, he found himself besieged by sniffles and coughs and wheezes, and so he did what any allergy-besieged strongman would do. He cut all the trees around him down with a chainsaw. And this was like a big story in Chicago at the time, that Mr. T was cutting all the woodland down in this area. And it was causing some controversy. And night after night, I would beg my parents to take me to see Mr. T cutting the trees down. And my parents were saying, like, no, Mr. T's not cutting them down himself. He's paying people to do it. But I really, really wanted to see this, and I kept begging them and begging them and begging them. And finally, they relented. They took me to see Mr. T. Mr. T's house. So we drove there, and we somehow found the house. And when we got there, I was actually proved right. Mr. T was outside this huge mansion with a chainsaw and like a schmati covering his mohawk, cutting all the trees down. And he was like cradling the chainsaw like my father whacked weeds. And and there was a crowd watching him. It was just the greatest thing I had ever seen in my life. And by the next day, I had just totally forgotten about it because I was a kid. So I went to junior high and I went to high school, and there's nothing really to report. And then I got to college, and it was the early, mid-1990s, which was a really particular time in American culture in that we, I think people my age started looking at the pop culture that we had grown up with in the 70s and the 80s, and just seeing how weird and ridiculous and probably cocaine-inspired it was. And we were sort of looking at it with this very unique mix of awe and irony. And so one day early on in school, a friend of mine, one of my new dorm mates, came back to the dorm, and he had gone to a yard sale where he had bought a jigsaw puzzle. And when you put the jigsaw puzzle together, it would show Mr. T. It was like an 80s relic from the 80s. And we all gathered around his find, and it was like you would see like in a commercial showing suburbanites around a Chrysler. Like we were just all admiring this jigsaw puzzle. And somehow this story of seeing Mr. T as a kid, I suddenly remembered it. And I was like, well, shit, I was a little nervous, I was a little diffident, I was a freshman, I was like, I'm gonna tell them. So I told the story. and they loved it. It was like a hit. My new friends were so impressed with this story, and so immediately this became my story. I would tell it at any moment's notice. If conversation, dulled, there was an awkward silence, I would say, "Did I ever tell you about the time I saw Mr. T?" If somebody said, "Oh, my boyfriend just broke up with me," that's too bad. Did I ever tell you about the time I saw Mr. T cut all these trees down with a chainsaw? And so I went through school telling this story. It's my thing. And then I moved to New York after graduation, and I'm living here. And living at the time, this was like 10, 12 years ago, living just a couple blocks from here on 15th Street. And I come home from work one day, and there's an invitation in my mail for a Mr. T film festival. This was a film festival being presented by this friend of a friend. It was its 5th year. And to call it a festival, you should probably put quotes around it. It was basically this guy Matt and a few of his friends would sit in the living room watching Mr. T movies on a DVD. And I'd kind of been jealous. I'd always wanted an invitation, but I didn't know him too well. And I finally got this invitation. So I'm all excited. And I bring it to work the next day. And I worked at listing. I worked at Time Out in New York at the time. It was like a listings magazine. And I showed it to a friend there. And she was like, "Oh, your old friend Mr. T," because I had told her the story for a few days. And she said, "Can I list this in the magazine?" And I should have said, "Well, no, it's at this dude's apartment." But instead, I was like, "Yeah, list it in the magazine, the Mr. T Film Festival. Why not?" And I probably also should have told this guy Matt, who I barely knew, that I was doing this, but I didn't, because in my mind, I was doing this like mitzvah. It was like this great thing. I was gonna come to this party that I was barely invited to, and I was gonna have the magazine clipping in hand, and I was gonna have my story of seeing Mr. T. And people would sit around me like in a half moon like here, and I would tell them this story like it was like I was like an explorer in the 19th century, and was coming back to talk to people in the parlor about seeing Mr. T. So this is all in my mind. And then the day comes, my wife and I, get on the train over there. We go out to Brooklyn where this party is, and we get to this one-bedroom apartment, and I walk in more or less expecting to see 10 or so of Matt's friends, watching Mr. T movies. And the second I get in, I'm confronted by a drunk woman holding a Mr. T puppet, and she says, "Quit your jibba jabba." And I said, "Hi, where's Matt?" And she said, "Who's Matt?" And I said, "This is Matt's apartment." And she said, "I pity the fool." So I sort of inch my way in, and there are like tons of people there. It's like society's riffraff have all come into Matt's apartment. This one guy that really stood out was a tourist from Arkansas who was in New York City for the very first time. And he said that he had been taking a tour of the city. It was like his first or second day here, and they were showing him all this boring stuff like the Empire State Building, and he saw this listing and decided to come out to outer Brooklyn to the Mr. T Film Festival. A lot of weird sort of situations like that. So finally I inch my way through the party, and I find Matt, and he's sitting there on his couch with like a bowl of Doritos, and to his right there's like a shifty-eyed teenager, and to his left there's like a neighborhood cat woman, and he looks up at me with he looked angrier than Mr. T did all those years ago. So needless to say, I was not a hero at the party. I was not able to tell my little dumb story about Mr. T. I was not invited to the next year's film festival, and I lost a friend. But I gained a story, which was the time I ruined a Mr. T film festival. Thanks.
That was Jay Rudenberg, another clappity clap. This is Rick, Mr. Patrick. Give him a little clap. He's also a co-founder. We thought this was going to be the last Talking Stick ever because of budgetary cuts.
But then we just found out we're doing one more on December 18th, so we got the band back together. So I was going to say a lot of things about the last Talking Stick, but now I don't have to. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Patrick.
There's been a lot of change in my life this summer. Sold the house in Harlem. For the first time in 31 years in New York City, I didn't have to make a mortgage payment on August 1st. That's just a few weeks ago. It hasn't really sunk in. I like it. I've had almost 70 days to be primarily by myself, back in Michigan. I have an old schoolhouse. It's kind of derelict. It's a summer studio. It's a garden. It's a hideaway when the city gets to be too much. I've really enjoyed that time. My mother is being transitioned to a memory care facility. She no longer can live on her own. I sold my house and my business, my hotel business, dried up. I was the Harlem Renaissance House. On TripAdvisor, mostly number 3, but once in a while number 2 for bed and breakfast in New York City. That's a pretty damn good thing to be. And I had guests from all over the world, but starting July of last year, 14, the reservations just disappeared. Bed and breakfast on the way went out of business that September. Turns out that a couple of things changed, but mostly that the guests that wanted to come to Harlem for where it was a little risky and scary, which Harlem really isn't, but you know, that's what TV taught them, are all now going to Bushwick. People say, oh, Airbnb goes to Bidmer. I said, no, hell no, it's Bushwick. People follow fashion. That's a cool place to go. That's where you want to be. I mean, why not? You're 32 years old. You're from Barcelona with your friends. You're going to go to New York. Where are you going to stay? Harlem? Nah, that's all fashionable. White folks live there now. I lived there 9 years. I lived 30 years in Tribeca. I'm sorry, 20 years. 30 years in Harlem. 10 years. I'm exhausted. I drove through the night to get here from Michigan. This was supposed to be our last show. What the museum really asked us to do is, could we do more shows in the theater and bring in money? See, we're part of the free event. It's okay, we've been doing it for 10 years. It's been really wonderful. I'm glad the museum has let us do that, but they too said it's kind of time for this to come to an end. I don't see how it costs them any money, but I don't mind it coming to an end. We can do more things. Talking Stick at the Frick. Why not? I used to own a Vermeer. And one of theirs is fake. And I'm one of the people on the planet that can say so. First time I got up on stage was about 12 years ago, and somebody said, you shouldn't do that. You should never get up on stage and tell a true story. You should twist it around and fabricate it and change the names and, you know, above all, never ever tell the truth. Wasn't long after that, everybody's doing storytelling. Nobody's a comic anymore, they're comedic storytellers. When you listen to the, I'm in Michigan and there's not the plethora of information we have here. Little rabbit ears in the window getting a couple of channels. And the newscaster's a storyteller. So a friend of mine from the city, she does storytelling in her house in Brooklyn, and she was camping with her husband in Michigan. She goes, here's our organization, go hang out with these folks. So I send off the email, and they go, yeah, come on up, we're doing an event on Wednesday. So I drive up to Midland, Michigan, and it's nice. There's a storm over here and the sunset over here, and I'm driving north, and it's by the university, in the university library at Central Michigan, and I find the place, and it's a building they built at the end of the library, and it's about as big as this whole floor, the storytelling wing. It's like, whoa, this is fucking great. And you walk in, there's a painting as big as this glass thing, and it's Storytelling Festival 2005 and all this stuff, and then another one, and another one, and another one, and then the wall's blank. And there was a table with two old people, a man and a woman, sitting at it. Is this the right place? Yeah, you're at the right place. Is this a storytelling event? Yeah. Where's everybody? This is pretty much it. What happened? Well, this is about all that ever comes. Didn't school start? Yeah. Where's the storytelling event? They said, oh, well, the lady that got the funding left in 9. You notice the painting stopped then. That's true. They had spaces for 1 for 10, 11, 12, all the way, but they were waiting for her to come back. Nobody had been coming for years to these meetings. It was a bizarre experience. The one man said, I drove an hour to get here and I closed the meeting at 7:43 because I could get home with just enough lake light. How many people know what lake light is? Well, they live way north in Michigan, close to the Lake Michigan on that side, on the west side. And if the sun is setting across the water, it reflects a lot of light. So even though it might be dark, you can still see if you're driving that way. And he's old, and get the lake light so you get home safe. It's like, wow. We talked about how to build stories. We talked about, well, if they ever did have a festival, they want to call it the Telebration. They want to be a part of it on public TV, and they had a plan. And she goes, I think we should not have an MC. We should just do freeform and let people talk. And, hey, you guys got the spirit. It was bizarre. Never heard back from him. Sent my email. But it was like that movie, Waiting for Guffman. It was like time just stopped. They were still there waiting for the next thing to happen. And you leave New York because it's this thing, 2 things I did, 5 things I did, 2 things I did, 5 things I did. Oh, I forgot, I'm sorry, I forgot, I'm sorry, that's what I forgot. Yeah, I promised I'd be there. I know. We do so much stuff here. It's good to go back to Michigan and remember that most people's lives, it's maybe once a year, one day, something really cool happens. Maybe. For us, it's like every other minute something amazing is right there. And oh my God, look what they're doing over there. And it gets to you, but it also feeds you. But you forget. We aren't like the rest of America, people. We're in a museum telling stories in front of religious artwork. I was at the post office and a guy opened up his car door next to me. He had to be 25 and his wife probably 20. And she went over and he goes, woman, watch what you're doing. It's my hometown in Michigan. And someone from Michigan's over here laughing. I drove through the night to be here for this. It's a nice drive. You get to think about things. It's nice not having a house. We're hauling up in a hotel tonight on the Upper East Side on the 19th floor with a balcony so Boris can smoke. They got valet parking. You know me, parking is a big deal. Thank you for coming.
That was Mr. Patrick, everybody. Talking Stick has been running for 10.5 years now, so if you like what you saw, come back on December 18th. If you didn't like what you saw, come back on December 18th as totally new people. I'm supposed to step forward to make a face. Talking Stick has a couple guidelines we use, which is tell the truth, you know, you're in a museum. Speak from the heart, go deeper, mix the tribes, have fun. Get to know the artist. What's that? Oh yeah, we're doing a show at St. John's, that big thing on 112th Street. And it is a big thing, right?
Yes, you gotta find us on Facebook. That's how you're all here.
We're
right?
Talking Stick. We have a radio show called Talking Stick at Radio Free Brooklyn, where you hear people talk for an hour. Hopefully they blow your minds. If not, it's kind of a waste of time, right? And we're doing this, and a lot of people are doing different things. Mikey Campbell, who did the 5-minute meditation, is doing this thing called House World. Opens in October, and it's basically in a church and a rectory. That's like the building connected to where the guys from the corporation come out. And in different rooms, there's different musicians and different performance artists. So it's like cool and shit. All right. Well, and Charles, do you have any shows coming up?
I'm going to play at the Sidewalk Cafe on October 10th.
Sidewalk Cafe, Charles Mansfield. Sidewalk Cafe, for those who don't know, is really a cool place, except for the owner. Shocking, but that's the truth. It's on 6th Street and Avenue A. I used to live on 6th Street between A and B for like 30 years, so come check out Charles Mansfield, Chaz Palace, Debbie Dillon, a lot of things going on. Talk to artists. Good night.